like you, Bill. I just your mom. I know your church is true. I love my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters.
I know that Christ lives and that he loves me. And I know beyond a
shadow of a doubt that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God.
I know.
All right. Hello, this is Alaina.
And this is Jonathan.
And this is Beyond a Doubt podcast. So, introducing ourselves. I was born and raised in the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as they say. Mormon is derogatory now. And I was a true believing Mormon, hardcore. And we're going to share my personal conversion story in a little bit. I was born in the church, but I did have a personal conversion that made me believe in it, quote, beyond a doubt. So yeah, I had the typical raising where I was born in the church. I got baptized. I went to the temple. I went on a mission. And
well, that's not typical for
it's not
for a lady.
That's true. I guess women get married first, unless.
Well, I mean, don't most women not go on missions?
That's true.
That's pretty atypical.
Yeah, I guess so. Plus, the even more atypical part is that I wanted to go since I was 4 years old, not because I hadn't gotten married yet. So, yeah, that was pretty atypical as well. And my husband, Jonathan, over here.
So, yeah, I'm not Mormon at all. I was born in Texas and lived there until I was 16. I met one Mormon in that entire time, and I thought it was a cult. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand that it was kind of an offshoot of the Christian religion until my later teens, moving more into Mormon country in the USA, in the Wyoming, Idaho sort of area. And so no, I was raised completely outside of it. I have had experience with the church as a result of Alaina and friends and coworkers and previous relationships and such. So I've got a good deal of outsider's perspective on the Mormon Church, but absolutely no, I wasn't raised in it. It's not a part of me. It's just a thing that I've seen from the outside for, probably 2/3 of my life at this point.
And you had no previous religious affiliation?
I attended I was part of a church youth group at a non-denominational Bible church during my kind of earlier teens. And, that was kind of about it. I had vague thoughts on spirituality and whatnot, but I didn't consider myself anything more than just a Christian. I don't consider myself that anymore. I'm not, atheist is probably the closest definition at this point. But yeah, so, I've got some familiarity with just, religion in general. I'm not a complete outsider, but I definitely was not raised in it.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, and so I guess the reason why I made this podcast is because I've noticed that there are a lot of people leaving the church lately. A lot of people that I know personally. And I also, there are two, okay, my point of view as I started to leave the church was that it was incredibly difficult.
So real quick, it's, to clarify, it's a thing where you had your own experience separating from the church, and you're witnessing that happening around you a lot now. Right. Years later.
Yes, it's been like almost 2 decades since I started leaving.
So, maybe to just, I don't know, kind of give us some context. Like, you say you were hardcore
Right.
involved in the church, but like how much?
Oh.
Like that's I mean, to me, I would say I believed pretty, I mean, I prayed nightly until I mean, my early 30s, I would say. I believe pretty strongly, but I would never use the term hardcore to describe my commitment to the Christian faith.
Okay.
So what does that mean for you?
Okay, so hardcore for me is like having had my own personal revelation that the church was true. I lived it and went to every meeting. That wasn't the big part though, but the big part was my testimony. I shared it all the time. I went to seminary and I did all this studying on my own. I read the Book of Mormon nearly a dozen times from the time I was about 12 or 13 until the time I started to leave the church at around 23. So in a span of 10 years, I read that book every day. I kept a journal, and I would actually bear my testimony to my family in random talks that we would have. Just like, oh, hey, that reminds me of the church and this, the gospel and Jesus Christ and all this because of this. And you're on the right track, or why don't you think about I wasn't like a preachy person, but I definitely shared,
Tied everything back to it.
Oh my gosh, so much. Everything went back to the gospel, to Jesus Christ. Now, the gospel is basically the doctrine of the church, and
Wait a minute. That's something that I'm a little confused about because I mean, maybe I'm mishearing this, but from an outsider's perspective, at least, in kind of just more vanilla Christian faith, when people talk about the gospel or they talk about the gospels, they're talking about Mark, John, Paul,
Right.
those four core books
True.
that talk about Jesus. Do Mormons have a different, like, do they use that term differently, or
we do. Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So gospel isn't referring just to those books. It's referring to like all of the scriptures. It's referring to the beliefs that we have, and for example, like quote, the truths, if you will, about Jesus Christ, about life after death, about where we came from before we were born. All of the church's beliefs, as far as I understand it, are considered the gospel.
Holy, okay. That I legitimately did not know that until right this moment.
Yeah.
And I've always, to me, the idea of like, oh, that's the gospel, that's a thing that it has always kind of been more of like an elevated sort of term. Like, I mean, those four books are the only ones in the Bible that get that have that designation, and it's because they all cover the same subject, which is really like the core subject of Christianity, that being,
Right.
The life and teachings of Christ.
Right.
And so, like, you hear the term gospel, and that to me says like this is kind of the pinnacle of religious teaching. And the idea that the LDS Church applies that term just broadly to Mormonism, like we're the gospel of religion,
I didn't think of that.
That might be like just my brain is spinning out of control, like trying to deal with the ramifications of that. Like that takes a degree of cojones that I mean, that to be totally honest, I've only ever really encountered with the Mormon Church anyway, so I also probably shouldn't be that surprised.
That's a good point.
God, that's nuts.
So how did that come up? I can't even remember. What were you talking about? The gospel? I don't remember.
Yeah,
So, well, basically, okay. So, I was saying that originally. I was saying it's hard to leave the church, and it's a very long process for most, if not all of us. At least for the people who, I don't know many people who actually truly believed their whole lifetime. Not many. Most people had doubts their whole lifetime, and then they did studying and all kinds of things to try and figure out if this is true, if it's for them or not, and then they ultimately end up leaving. Very few people have a personal conviction that it is 100% truth. And so mine actually came, my mother is the most angelic person in the world. And
It's true.
it is true. I'm not just saying that. And she's very, she is very religious and spiritual. And she
Within the Mormon Church.
within the Mormon Church, yes, and she doesn't do anything but set an example. She's never preached. She's always accepted every one of her children completely as they are, whether they believe anymore or not.
And
like,
her children-in-law. I mean,
yes,
it's,
yeah,
I came into the family, essentially an atheist, and she's never once confronted me, preached to me, attacked or judged me in any way. It's never been any kind of point of contention of any sort.
yeah.
It's and that in my experiences just has been a rarity.
Yeah,
Encountering someone that kind of becomes an important part of the intimate circle of your life, and them being a big part of their identity is their religion, is their
and
spirituality, and they don't to have someone who is at that place and is also not using it as a bludgeon
right.
against you because of the difference between the two of you. That's more of a rarity. Like, you would think most people would be like that, like in an idealistic way, but that just hasn't been my experience.
Yeah, no, mine either. But so it starts with her. I have a very, very good long-term memory. I have described several memories to my parents, and my mom would just stare at me and be like, you weren't even 1 yet, or you were just between 1 and 2. I remember the birthday presents my sister got when she turned 1, and like all these details. But so my earliest memories are of my mom and the way she made me feel, which ultimately I ended up associating with the only way a God could make you feel as his child. And I mean, if my mother existed, then God existed, and he was just as good as she was. I started out believing that what she believed had to be true because of her example. So then I really, anyway, like by the time it was my turn to be baptized, I wanted to be, and I had the interview and everything with this leader of the ward who, interviews little 8-year-old kids and said, hey, do you really want to be baptized? Do you have a testimony in Joseph Smith and of the church? And I did. Well, I didn't know yet, but I did have a belief in it, mostly of the God and Jesus Christ. I wasn't yet sure about Joseph Smith. Actually, I never was sure about him. But the reason I hung on to him as a prophet was because if the church is true, if the Book of Mormon is that spiritual, then he had to be a true prophet of God. I just didn't have that personal conviction of him. I was like, yeah, he's an imperfect man who began a perfect or who was inspired
divinity by association.
Yeah. He inspired or discovered this perfect church. But so yeah, so
in a hat.
So on my baptism day, I was baptized, and I expected, because the scriptures say, at least the modern scriptures of the Mormon Church, like Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants, that you'll have a baptism by fire, which means not like literal fire. It means your soul will feel just overwhelming feelings of the Holy Ghost, the Holy Ghost confirms to you that God and Jesus Christ live, and that, that they're there, that this church is true. So every time you feel one of those special feelings, it's the Holy Ghost, quote, bearing witness that what you're feeling and hearing is truth and accurate. So I was baptized, and I was like, well, I didn't have that. Maybe I'm not necessarily in the right place. I guess I just don't get that. But then came time for my confirmation. Do you know what that is, hon?
No.
That's the confirmation is when you are given the gift of the Holy Ghost, which means ultimately you are given that spirit as a constant companion. And they did or do, I don't know if it's anymore because things have been changing, but they at least used to say that people all will have the Holy Ghost companionship to a degree. Non-Mormons can at least know, like, what's come to think, this sounds kind of weird, what's right from wrong, and that they can have confirmation through the Holy Ghost. Mormons are given the gift of the Holy Ghost, which means that they have it constantly and can receive personal revelation from God and Jesus through the Holy Ghost. So, yeah, and now that I think about that, that's conscience, like right and wrong, and
Jiminy Cricket is the Holy Ghost.
So anyway, I was given the gift of the Holy Ghost, and as I was confirmed, they say, I say unto you, receive the Holy Ghost. And at that moment, I felt the baptism by fire. It was my whole body, my whole spirit. I was burning with this confirmation that what was happening at that moment was true, and that I had just received that gift from God. And I never had another question about the church, because that proved to
not
me,
never. You just went on a long
True.
sabbatical from questioning the church.
very long. I didn't question it at all until after my mission, which actually started with seeing the members of the church being jerks and judgmental, and I started questioning, like, how could a church like cultivate that kind of behavior? Anyway,
well, not just that, but these are supposed to be the cream of the crop. They're supposed to be the
chosen
vanguard, the warriors in service to the teachings of Joseph Smith. And meanwhile, they're acting like a bunch of frat boys.
Yeah, exactly. That's the missionaries. And then, but yeah, so that was my conversion story. As a born and true believing Mormon, I had that truth proven to me through that experience. And every time I studied or heard a lesson or anything like that, I would get that feeling, not that strong, but I always had it reconfirmed to me that it was true. And so I would bear my testimony with absolute conviction that I had reached the truth, the pinnacle of truth, in that I had the gospel, the knowledge of the full gospel, the restored gospel, not just 4 books. So that's where I'm coming from. And I don't know how many people out there have had similar situations. I'm assuming most of them are actually converts rather than people who've been born into the church. And the moment you start questioning that is very difficult, because this is your life. This is everything you've ever believed, everything you've ever been told, and everything you've accepted as truth. It flips your world upside down when you realize that something about it is kind of off. We'll go more into that in other episodes about what it was that started me on that trip, or things that have me where I'm at now. But
A
yeah.
thing to maybe just kind of as a disclaimer ahead of time is that my experience could not have been more different from that. People talk about, and I accept as an external fact the idea that having grown up your entire life, understanding a certain set of truths and accepting, a way to things, and then having that dissolve, or having it eroded, or some impetus to begin questioning it, is a very difficult thing.
Yeah.
That I may come across, in future episodes as uncharitable or maybe unempathetic towards that kind of stuff, maybe making jokes about it. I do. It's not that I don't feel sympathy towards the experience. I didn't have it. The closest thing I had was my parents divorcing when I was 11, and outside of that, everything else has been just kind of constant change and chaos in my life, and there never really was like a bedrock set of principles that went beyond just what I knew to be facts about the world around me and what I observed with my own senses. That was it. There was really almost nothing else, beyond that had been that I'd been afforded as any sort of like foundational truth about things. Everything else beyond that was, a father, on and off drugs and going to jail, and me being carted halfway across the country, and things like that. There was never anything stable, and so I don't want to come across like I don't respect that situation, because I do. I understand trauma and change of that sort. To an extent, but not nearly as much of one. So apologies in advance if I come across as maybe like not as understanding of that sort of thing.
That's fine. Also, this is not like this is not supposed to be an anti-Mormon thing. It's more of just a sharing thing. And if he does come across ever as anti-Mormon,
that's probably going to be my fault. And it's not just Mormonism. It's
religion. Religion in general. Yeah. So we both no, he can apologize for that. I won't apologize for him if I ever come across that way, and it probably will at some point, because when you go through things like this, it's almost like you follow the steps of coping with death. When there's an anger period in your lifetime, and I'm not entirely past that part yet. Feeling betrayed, feeling, disappointed in myself, terribly sad that it's not the way I expected it to be, just stuff like that. And there's definitely some anger there.
It's like relearning there's no Santa. Constantly.
That's exactly what it is. That is exactly what it is. And in fact, that was part of what made me realize that was probably 100% yourself. That conversion story had nothing to do with external forces. It was exactly what I wanted. It was exactly what I was looking for, and my mind created it for me. So, and I realized that I have the tendency to do that because when I was 12, I still believed in Santa Claus, and I knew that the year that I was 12, I'd been, this is embarrassing, but I had been so good all year long. I knew that I was going to get a little pouch of magic golden dust from Santa Claus. It's so, but my parents pulled me aside just a few months before Christmas and said, listen, Santa Claus doesn't exist. And my life, my world was crushed. And I was like, no magic dust? Like, I was so, everything had just been broken for me. And I realized years later that I do that. I have a tendency to believe in the magical. I want so badly for it to exist that I accept it as real. And it takes external forces to show me.
You're an optimist after your own mother's heart. It basically is what it is that you want very, very badly to believe the best in everything.
Yeah.
And unfortunately that takes its toll on you when everything doesn't live up to those expectations, or not expectations, but those hopes.
That's a good point.
Which
a
is
good way to put it.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
But you keep taking the hits like a champ.
I know. Okay, good. Oh man. So that's a good wrap up.
Pretty much.
Our introduction to this podcast.
Yeah.
And
We've got the true believer going through, still going through her healing process and trying to share that with others who might understand it. And we've got her husband who doesn't get it, but wants to help.
Yeah. And also seeing the two different perspectives and points of view, I hope will also help listeners to see both sides of the story. And particularly my side being like, I just lost my train of thought. But, more logical rather than spiritual and believing. Jonathan has definitely helped me see that there are some interesting things that I believed in wholeheartedly as we've gone through that just don't really make sense anymore to me. And he's kind of put them in words for me. So yeah, so there's that. And here we go. Welcome to the podcast. We will talk to you next time.
See ya.